And I think I've just completely forgot my point. I've just completely forgot
You did this the first time as well. You started making this exact point and then forgot it again.
Oh my god, what's my point?
I'm gonna give you a minute to think about it.
What's my point?
I'll just edit this bit out.
I think the point I was making is that there's one decisive event that has ultimately led to his decision to do this. What? Oh my god, I've gone again.
Oh my god, Jamie! Hello and welcome back finally to the Vampire Book Club, the podcast where we say we're going to record in 2 weeks and then leave it for 3 months with no explanation. I'm Charlie.
I'm Jamie.
And we're finally back, people. Woo!
Woo! I can't remember what we promised we were going to do this episode, but it definitely, probably isn't what you're getting. So.
We did say we'd do the Cask of Amontillado, and
we did?
Yeah, we did.
Oh, okay.
We did. That's why we're doing it today, Jamie.
Good. Clearly I was doubting us.
We've kept one promise, even if we're so late. Yeah, we were busy.
Life comes at you hard.
Life came at us hard. You were on holiday, then I was ill, then we had a presentation, then we had like a million essays, then we both went on holiday, and like we've basically only just got back. So that's what we've been up to. Soz. Hope you are all so well. Today, as we have said, we are talking about The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe.
Yay! I like Poe. Do you like Poe?
I do like Poe, Jamie.
Good.
I haven't read. Do you know what? I haven't actually read a lot of Poe. I really like his poetry. I've read his poetry, but I haven't read many of the short stories. The only short story apart from this one that I read was The Telltale Heart. Mm-hmm. Which I think I have worse memories of it because I studied it at school.
Right.
So
you should read The Mask of the Red Death. That's one of my favourite stories ever. Read more it's Poe. Very good.
I do want to read more Poe. I really like his poetry as a thing. I remember I first came to Poe. Did you ever watch Holes?
Holes? Are you saying Hulls or Holes? I have not watched Holes.
It's such a good film, Jamie. I can't believe you've
not
seen it.
Is that the movie based on the book? By
It's got Shia LaBeouf in it. Like a really young Shia LaBeouf.
No.
Oh my god, it's such a good book, but there's a part like where there's a flashback and like this teacher in like this old Western schoolhouse is like reading to these children.
I do know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure who the author is.
She's reading Annabelle Lee.
Right.
And then Joe comes in and he's like, I can fix that. And
really yes! No, I know Holes.
Yeah.
I know Holes.
Yeah.
I definitely know Holes.
Yeah, that's when I first came. That was when I was first introduced to Edgar Allan Poe through the poem Annabelle Lee. Still one of my favourite poems. And then also read The Raven. And
I read The Raven. That was my
Raven's
introduction to Crow as well. Yeah, Raven was a classic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We didn't sound very enthused then, but yeah.
Well, I just like The Mask of the Red Death so good. So much. So my brain is still vaguely scrambled from these recent assessments.
My
brain is still yeah.
They did you hard, man.
They did.
Yeah, they did.
They really, extremely did.
That was rough.
Anyways, Cask of Amontillado.
Cask of Amontillado.
Barrel of
wine. I hadn't read this before.
Yeah, neither have I.
Coming to this, so I was quite excited. It is about a man named... What the fuck's his name? Montresor? That's how I've been saying it.
I've been saying it Montresor.
Montresor.
I don't think either of them
probably the original Italian.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that Montresor sounds very like saurian to me. It's very like what you'd name a dinosaur. You know, like that's why I've been sort of like placing stress on Montresor.
Okay, we'll go with Montresor. We'll go with Montresor for the podcast.
Right, okay.
Lest people mistake it for the dinosaur.
If you can phonetically spell out Montresor's name, in an email and send it to us.
Or a voice note. Send us a voice note, why not?
Or just that. Just the phonetic spelling of the name. No context.
No context.
Also,
just like in the email title and then just like a blank email. Yeah, Montressor, who tells the reader that how he killed his friend Fortunato, and basically the way he did it was to lure him down into the basement of his house during Carnival with the promise of tasting this refined wine, this cask of Amontillado, and ends up bricking him up in his catacombs.
Mm-hmm. His ancestral catacombs, isn't it?
Yeah. It's like got like, he describes it as like the catacombs in Paris, which makes me think that Edgar Allan Poe only knew the catacombs in Paris.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's meant to have like just like the skulls of all his dead relatives and shit in it. It's a pretty spooky place.
Yeah. They're not like put away in their caskets. I don't know the difference between caskets and coffins and all the rest of it, so again, if anyone knows that, please correct me. But they're not put in their resting place very well, are they? They just seem to be sort of like...
Yeah, they're scattered
hanging about, yeah.
Scattered about.
In fact,
with a load of bricks and mortar.
He uses the skeletal remains of these ancestors to sort of like hide his bricks and mortar, which is...
But it also just makes me think, like, I was actually wondering this, like, how many dead relatives has he got? Because, like, there's a lot of skeletons in the catacombs of Paris. Like, it's skull upon skull upon skull. Like,
how many people has he done this to?
Yeah, to be fair, that's actually a good question.
Yeah.
Has he done this before?
Like, it was very well planned out.
Yeah.
It was extremely well planned out.
It was, well, yeah.
We can consider that.
We'll consider it later. We'll consider it later.
Your brain's been
through the ringer. Yeah. Honestly, listeners, the end of that last term, I have never been under so much stress in my entire life. But we both did really well, so it was fine.
Yeah.
It's fine in the end. Anyway, on to the Cask of Amontillado. Let's start with just a brief kind of feeling about these characters and kind of like what they both spoke to you about. Yeah.
Montressor. Is that how you agreed to say it?
Yeah.
It is. Montressor. I like him. I think he's a psychopath, or I think that like there's, something wrong with him in a pretty massive way, as one would expect one who makes the decision to literally not bury someone alive, brick in them. I was about to say brick someone in alive.
There is a word for alive entombment, but I can't remember what it is, so we won't use it.
That's a fun fact.
Yeah, there is a word out there.
I think that the way he kind of tries to explain away in these extremely vague terms, like why he almost has to do this, why he he describes it himself like
1,000 injuries. Fortunato I had borne as best I could.
When he ventured upon insult, I avowed revenge. Like
that's as much an explanation that we ever get of what Fortunato did to him.
Yeah,
that's it.
And then everything else is sort of like, woven into the subtext, or things that you can attempt to read, I suppose, woven into the subtext. I think now is also probably a good time to mention, before we properly get into this reading, this has happened. Montressor has done this 50 years ago. So we're being told this tale as sort of like a participant within the narrative after it's happened 50 years ago. I'm also like, how old is Montressor? Like, how is this like a deathbed confession?
That's a good point, actually. We never find out where he's telling it to us. It's all very vague. But yeah, like, there's a lot of sort of irony in the way sort of Montressor speaks, and like a lot of, like you said, like he's kind of like trying to be like, he's trying so hard to kind of say that, like, I had to do this, but like he's trying so hard, but like also being so vague that it's kind of like, did you actually have a reason? Yeah. Which is why like there is a theory that he could just be like insane. Because like 1,000 injuries, like what injuries, and also like 1,000 really, and also like what insult is the one that it means that you need to kill him, you know, like what did he do?
I must not only punish, but punish with impunity.
Yeah.
And impunity Montressa is quite obsessed with impunity or freedom of punishment, sort of someone, I believe I'm defining this correctly, someone sort of escaping punishment.
Yes.
Correct, right?
Yeah.
Exemption from punishment or freedom from the injurious consequences of an action. So he wants to make sure that this, whatever Fortunato has done, this final insult, I feel like he's getting, I think that he's getting at something final as well. The thousand injuries I've borne, when he ventured upon insult, Fortunato has done something in the mind of Montressa. There is a last straw. There is the camel's back has been broken.
Yeah, and it's like you say, like it's interesting that he like stipulates that I want to do this and not be punished for it, because he decides to brick him up in his own home.
Yeah,
like it's like if anyone just goes down to his basement, like it's gonna find Montressa's body. I mean, obviously it's bricked up, but you know, it's like it would be very clear like what had happened, you know.
But apart from it's been 50 years and it's
not well quite.
Yeah.
No one's unbricked it, but it just feels like if you really wanted to do this with impunity, like because there's a carnival going on at the time, which is why he's able to lure Fortunato down to his basement, because like Fortunato's quite drunk. Like you could have just stabbed him in the middle of like, you know, all of these people and no one would know what had happened. You know what I mean? Like people are dressed up, like put a fucking mask on.
Yeah. In fact, I believe he's wearing some form of like black silk as well when he goes down there.
Yeah, and yet he chooses to take him somewhere where there's clearly a link to him.
What do you get from the line? I think we're actually going to get into this, but I'm just interested. It is equally unredressed when the Avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who has done the wrong.
Yeah, again, it's one of those things where he kind of like, because this whole like we're getting all of this like from the very first paragraph, and like we go into the story with this very clear stipulation that he wants to punish Fortunato. He's done something terrible, we don't know what, but he's done something so terrible that he needs to be punished. He wants to get away with it, and he also needs Fortunato to know that he is being punished, and sort of why he's doing it as well.
I think,
and yet we get to the end of the story and he just is just mocking him. So like Fortunato obviously knows that he's like gonna kill him, but also doesn't, because like right at the very end, like when he's like, oh, I like before I put the last brick in or whatever, like Fortunato kind of still like sort of believes that it's a joke. So you know, it's kind of like, you know, you've not really like lived up to this kind of like big manifesto of like what you intended to do.
I do think the a wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser as well. There's this really bizarre sort of sense of detachment, but like what a wrong is unredressed or sort of like not corrected. A wrong is not corrected when retribution overtakes its redresser. Like that's why I think as well there's this almost sort of like divine punishment. It's almost kind of natural for this to happen to Fortunato. It's not just simply warranted, it's what has to happen. There's this almost sense of like balance about it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
There's certainly a sense like within his own mind that like he has to kill him for this insult. And it kind of feels like, do you?
Yeah.
Do you have to, you know? And because we never really get an explanation, you know, we're none the wiser. Like maybe he did, probably didn't. But yeah, so that's the mystery that is Montressa. Let's think about Fortunato now. Fortunato again is like someone.
Do you feel sorry for him?
I guess I do feel sorry for him, but only because like I think that I'd feel sorry for anyone who was like ripped alive into like
in a clown outfit.
Yeah, in a fucking clown outfit. Like that's just a sad, like that's a sad thing to happen to anyone. So yeah, I do feel sorry for him. I think that, you know, because obviously we're seeing it through the eyes of Montressa, who obviously is going to quite extreme lengths to kind of like prove that he's an idiot.
I also think as well, I think there's like two sides to it where, you know, you're kind of like, what could this bumbling drunk fool have done that was so egregious?
Yeah, literally, he's such an idiot.
This? But then we do get sort of like the Freemason comment, which we're going to talk about later, or the, you know, comment about masonry, where he's like,
he like makes an action and then he's like, oh, you don't understand what this means, so you're not a Freemason?
Yeah, you're not part of the secret fraternal society of the Freemasons and all the rest of it. So I think, you know, there is obviously...
He's obviously, like, very arrogant.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel anything other than kind of just, like, petty.
But also, like, I think as well, because Montressa doesn't go out of his way. He's sort of, like, not speaking. He doesn't feel like he has to sort of explain why he did it almost in a way. He doesn't feel like he needs to... It just had to happen. The details of the murder are more sort of, like, not just important, but enjoyable to Montressa, as opposed to the reason for why he did it, because that's a given, you know, like... Yeah,
it's kind of like, it's sort of like his own kind of genius in a way of like, oh, I fooled him, because throughout the kind of like, you know, the sense that we get of Fortunato is that obviously like he's described by Montressa as sort of like this kind of, he's supposed to be a fool, like he's dressed as a clown.
The man wore motley.
Yeah. He's like wearing like a jester's outfit, and because of the carnival, and he's really drunk at the time. And I think there's one point where like Montressa is kind of like, oh, like he had a weakness and I like exploited this weakness, and his weakness was for alcohol or whatever, which is interesting because he then goes on to say like, I also drink a shit ton.
Like, he does.
Like, so and we'll get onto my personal theory about why that is later, but we're obviously meant to think of Fortunato as this kind of like a sort of lucky fool. You know, his name is Fortunato. He's meant to be quite fortunate. We understand that he's, you know, got wealth and status. He's obviously a member of the Freemasons, which seems to, in the minds of both characters, be something aspirational in a way. And so, you know, like a lot of like theories about why he did it is just that like he's just sort of envious of Fortunato for being, because he like there's a sense that he feels that he's also better than Fortunato as well, because he isn't fortunate. Like he's sort of like the ultimate kind of like Kurt Cobain character. Like his pain makes him great, you know? Like, oh, I haven't had it.
He does go on that long sort of like, not so much, I wouldn't call it a rant, but he's just kind of like, oh, I was happy once as well. But it's also interesting as well because like we just spoke about the fact that like there seems to have been, I think in the way that he's described it, one decisive event, one injury, sort of like one thing that has led to this decision. There's this, oh my God, I need to brick this guy up. This guy has to be bricked up. To think about whether like this thing that Fortunato has done has stolen his happiness, or he's kind of like where this like lack of zest for life comes from. So I don't know whether, because the whole point is like, you know, of this tale especially, is that we're sort of like dancing around the point, and Poe knows that, and Montressa knows that as well, that like the burning question is, why did you do this? Why did you do this? Why? So like each detail we sort of get in the narrative is like, oh, I'm very unhappy. Unlike you, and it almost feels like in certain, like in a certain sense, that there should have been more of a conversation there. Like I don't know whether like because we don't know what has happened between them. Like he doesn't really question that, either does Fortunato. So is where is this unhappiness coming from, I think is...
Which leads us on to our second point, which is sort of the concept of vengeance and justice, and like, does the punishment fit the crime? Well, the crime is that he's entombed, obviously. But like that's obviously like I said, like it's. I didn't say it while we were recording. I said this before to you, but is that he's almost, so he doesn't like choose to stab him, He doesn't choose to, I don't know, kill him in a way where, like, he watches him die, knows that he's dead. Like, there's not, like, he kills him, like, he just bricks him up and, like, lets him starve, essentially. So it's like, there's no confirmation that he's dead because, like, he never opens the tomb to check. So it's kind of like Schrodinger's cat in a way, although we know he's dead because it's like 50 years later, he must have died. But you know, like, he's never, like, he's not got visual confirmation or anything like this. And it's kind of like a very sort of, like, hands-off way of killing someone. Like, he's sort of just letting nature, you know, take its course and letting him starve.
Or rather, not just nature, I suppose. Like, I think also, like, very popular readings talk about Freemasonry and Catholicism and Venice, this being set in Venice, is a Catholic city. So I also think it's very interesting, that previous point that you made, where they definitely have aspirations of towards whatever, the Freemasonry, because Fortunato is definitely a part of the Freemasons, as we know. Montressor, I think that his reaction is sort of more difficult to glean, and I also think, especially as he's kind of like, you know, this is coming from, like, this is being orated to us, this tale, is also quite purposeful. But I have a quote here. James E. Rocks argues that Montressor regards Fortunato as a political and a religious enemy, and is thus motivated by a hatred of the Freemasonry. And then the insult, this ultimate insult that he's committed, is probably more likely against the Catholic faith than himself. I don't know whether I necessarily agree with that. I don't know if I necessarily agree with the idea that he's insulted the Catholic faith, because I don't necessarily know whether the text invites us to see Montressor as a deeply religious character, aside from the fact that he lives in Venice and clearly doesn't know anything about the Freemasonry. I guess we can suppose that he's probably Catholic. There are a lot of kind of like biblical allusions. His crest is sort of like vaguely biblical. We'll talk about that later. But like also like the concept of like justice and sort of vengeance. You know, and his sort of like what you were talking about, like the belief that he just has to die that is like, it's almost like divinely like ordained that there is no coming back from this. There's no redemption. Like he has to be smited. He does. So I would think it was fair to say he's operating probably from like perhaps some form of like a Catholic understanding. I don't think that the insult was against Catholicism. I think it was probably directly against Montressor.
I think also like there's like, you know, that conversation between them about Freemasonry is sort of very much like, I get the sense that like Montressor is kind of embarrassed that he's not a Freemason.
Yeah. And
this is again like, this is kind of related to the question of sort of like, what is the nature of the offence? But like, what happens in the scene is basically that like Fortunato does some kind of like movement, and he's like, oh, did I confuse you with that? Oh, it's because you're not a Freemason. You can't be a Freemason because that's what we all do together as Freemasons. And Montressor's like, oh yeah, no, I'm totally a Freemason. Like I totally got
trowel.
What you just did. Like totally. And then like breaks out a trowel, and Fortunato's like, that's fucking weird.
Yeah.
And, like,
okay.
Yeah, literally. But it just seems like someone who's like trying to be like he kind of wants to be seen.
It's the one time that he's shaken as well. Like the one time, not that he's necessarily surprised. Well, I don't know. I think it's the one time that he's actually shaken, because you know Montressor's going down and being like, he seems almost to have a script. Like he's like, be careful of the nitra on the walls. Like you are coughing so much. Like, but this movement, this gesture that Fortunato does with an empty bottle of wine that he finishes, he does a movement, a grotesque one, and Montressor looks at him in surprise. So I do think that this is surprising. This is off script for him.
Yeah, he's like, I'll quickly read the scene out. His eyes flashed with a fierce light. He laughed and threw the bottle upwards with a gesticulation I did not understand. I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement, a grotesque one. You do not comprehend, he said. Not I replied. Then you are not of the Brotherhood. How? You are not of the Masons. Yes, yes, I said. Yes, yes. You, impossible, a Mason. A Mason, I replied. A sign, he said. A sign. It is this, I answered, and produced a trowel from beneath the vault. It's really funny to read. You jest, he exclaimed, and recoiling a few paces. But let us proceed to the Amontillado. So, like, he's clearly like, oh, you're clearly not a Freemason. Yeah. You're just joking. And, like, Montress is clearly like, no, I am. Yeah. And just, like, tries to do something that he thinks is sort of related to Freemasonry, and it just doesn't really work.
I agree.
So it's like he clearly, like, wants to be seen in this way. And I've read a lot of, like, stuff that kind of, like, implies that, obviously a big kind of theory about, like, what is the nature of this offence is kind of like, well, it's just that Fortunato is especially fortunate and happens to be, like, he's a member of the Freemasons, he's obviously got money, he's obviously, very successful in life, and Montresor doesn't feel like he has the same, and he's clearly not a member of the Freemasons, and so he is incredibly, like, envious of Fortunato, and this is sort of like one of those moments where there's other, like, implications throughout the text as well, where it's sort of implied that, like, Montresor has sort of, like, lost a certain level of social standing, whereas Fortunato has sort of gained it, and a kind of, the scales kind of tipped from one to the other, and that is the offence that Fortunato deems is is not even necessarily, like, the that's the real reason, like, why he kills him, is because he's so, like, envious, but again, he doesn't I hesitate to say that he doesn't really kill him. He obviously does, but, like, he does it in the like I said, like, he does it in this way where he's not witness to the actual death.
Yeah.
And so, it's sort of like, there's a level of, like, remove there where he almost doesn't want to be, like, responsible for it in some way, like,
yeah,
there's a hesitancy there. And so, even though, like, entombing someone is, like, sort of like a horrible death,
terrible,
like, it's kind of it's better for Montresor because he doesn't have to actively, like, deal with that.
Exactly. The act of killing, it's sort of the, I suppose there's more of a, you can sort of remove, he's able to remove himself mentally from the act more so than, like, literally stabbing him in the chest, which is a very explicit act of murder, as opposed to this, which you can probably not successfully argue, but you could definitely argue that I didn't technically kill him. I just chained him to a wall and then bricked him up.
Yeah.
There was no killing blow.
Yeah, exactly. There's no killing blow.
There was intent, massive amounts of murderous intent. But I think it's all also down to the sort of drama of it. There's a lot of theatre, and it is the night of Carnival as well.
Yeah, it is, and it's interesting, like, the kind of the background of Carnival, and also the background of this sense of divine justice that Montresor sort of feels, because there's one point very early in the text where he says a quote. Let me see if I can find it. He says, he definitely has it. Oh yeah, so he talks about, like, this act as being an immolation, which is a word that means to kill or destroy by fire, which is obviously, like, a very, like, biblical sort of image, but also, like, to offer up, like, as a sacrificial victim, which is not really, like, what we see going on, but clearly, like, in the mind of Montresor, he really feels that this is some kind of divine sacrifice, that there is this element of, like, divine justice in what he's doing,
I agree. I also think it's interesting to choose immolation because of its associations with fire as well, whereas there is just constant sort of commentary on how damp and dark and wet. The catacombs are, the vaults are, and also he's not like burning up. He's gonna rot away. And he has rotted away by the time that the story is being told to us.
Yeah, I guess that's another element of sort of the irony of like what he wants to do and then what actually happens. And I think that point about like it being really like dark and damp is like quite interesting because like there's like a real emphasis on kind of like the sort of suppression of the senses in this text. Like he does this like when Fortunato's drunk, like they're going to find this cask of wine, like it's during like carnival, this time of like revelry and sort of confusion, like Fortunato's dressed up, like they're both like in costume, they go into this place that you can't see, and like I think it's described as like really echoey as well, so like like your senses are all kind of like, I don't know, sort of thrown like in the same way as our sense as the reader is of like what's going on, of like what kind of like filter are we seeing this through, like is this an accurate retelling, like is this how he remembers it, like is his memory faulty, was he drunk at the time, like is this you know, like you to the point where you could question like is this just a fucking fever dream?
Like to what extent, if this actually happened exactly as Montressor is telling us, and Fortunato did not sort of show, like, if it really did, I think that there is like many readings you could do on the nature of their relationship, why Fortunato was like, oh, it's cool, I'll go down further and further and further and further and further into the vaults of this man who's bought this. Why in the world would they, you know, he's apparently just bought this barrel of wine and they've put it all the way down here, and there's no mention of sort of like, you know, we've got other barrels, I suppose, but like by the time we get to the massive amounts of human skeletons, like would he not be, and we know there's a reason for them being there because it's a family vault, but nonetheless there is sort of no questioning. So is that just, and I think that you either can read that as like it's indicative, I suppose, of a certain closeness, or Montressor is just sort of twisting the facts either as he remembers them or as he is wishing to sort of like portray them to us, the hearer, I guess. Yeah,
and it's also interesting because like Montressor like actively points out kind of how this space is sort of affecting Fortunato, because he's kind of like Fortunato like has this cough, and he keeps saying, like, he keeps coughing, and Fortunato's like, oh, like we should go back, like your health, like it's not good for you down here, like, and sort of like drawing attention to the fact that Fortunato to some degree is being like physically affected by this kind of space which is depriving like his senses, and kind of actively like sort of making him ill, and it sort of draws attention to it, and it's sort of like you were saying before we started this podcast, like how I can't remember what you were saying, but it made me think of like how it's almost like a get out kind of, like it's almost like if you're clever enough to work out what's going on, like you could get out of this, but it's almost like he's proving.
Like, look at all this accumulation of this nitra. What are we calling it? Nitra?
Nitra.
Yeah,
this
he like
draws attention to it.
This is definitely making your health worse. So that's why I'm like, are we supposed to glean something from their relationship there? That, like, they were clearly sort of, like, friendly enough for Fortunato to be like, oh, this isn't a threat on my life. But also in the same vein, for when Montressor like, oh, you know, you're happy and beloved and admired and beautiful, just like I once was. And Fortunato's just like,
he just doesn't notice. And it's almost like he's setting, like, it's almost like he's proving to himself, like, oh, like you could get out of this, like, if you were smart enough. And he's proving to himself that Fortunato has to die in a way. Like, he's proving to himself that he's not worthy of living.
I think he's probably still actually proving to himself in the telling of it as well, like 50 years later.
Yeah, like he's proving himself to himself that Fortunato is not worthy of living by giving him this clause out, where it's like if you were kind of aware of it, like you would pick up that
you're in massive amounts of danger,
and this isn't somewhere you should be. But because you don't, you therefore like I'm allowed to kill you because you let yourself be foolish enough to get to this place.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. You put it very well.
Thank you. We've talked about Manchester's account being faithful. So,
What we on?
Jamie's screaming bit.
Well, it's not so much
which kind of relates to our discussion on sort of sensory deprivation, but like the way that the senses are sort of explored is interesting.
Yeah. Well, by my screaming bit, I just have one bullet point in my notes that says, how is the nature of screaming, yelling, moaning tied into the approach of Fortunato's death? Because there is a bit where Montressor says, the earliest indication I had of this was a low moaning cry from the depth of the recess. It was not the cry of a drunken man. There was then a long and obstinate silence, and then he lays more bricks, and then he lays more bricks. The noise lasted several minutes, during that which I might hearken to it with the more satisfaction. I ceased my labours and sat down upon the bones. So he's enjoying these sort of like crying moans that Fortunato is making, so much so that he stops bricking up the wall to listen to it.
Builds a wall.
He
doesn't just like brick him in, he like
builds
puts
a
cement
wall.
And like
like he's already so far down that like it's very sort of unlikely that, or so it appears to me, that anyone's going to go down there, that Montresor's not going to just like, Montresor will have to allow them access. No, he has to literally, so they're not even part of the tomb. He's not even part of the tomb. He's in a separate walled off section from the ancestral tomb. Like he's sort of, but like nestled up against it. I think that's quite interesting. But anyway, the point I was making is that, he does this, and then after the moaning, then he begins a succession of loud and shrill screams bursting suddenly from the throat of the chained form seemed to thrust me violently back. And this frightens Montresor to the point that he unsheathes his rapier. But then he places his hand upon the solid fabric of the catacombs and feels satisfied that, I suppose, Fortunato can't escape.
Get out, yeah.
And then he replies to the yells of him who clamoured, re-echoed, I aided, I surpassed them in volume and in strength. I did this, and the clamourer grew still. Probably because he was fucking freaked out. That's a horrible thing to do, to like scream over him.
Yeah, literally just two men screaming.
Yeah.
Like it's just in this like dark, echoey place.
Yeah,
like,
filled with sort of like mouldy rocks and damp.
Yeah, it's really like, it does do a number on the senses, I think. Like the way it sort of engages in it, and the way that like he kind of builds in silence and sort of stops to enjoy the sensory assault, as it were.
Yeah, of Fortunato, I suppose, realising that in a true sense, that I think from the low moan, even though we get that bit later where he begins to laugh and says a very good joke indeed, I don't think he believes that he's getting out of there. Like, I don't think that's indicative of him being like, oh, this is actually a joke. I think he's attempting to sort of like I think these are throes of desperation. I think he knows from the first moan that I also think the sobering effects of these noises, or it says the Fortunato having, the intoxication of Fortunato had in great measure worn off. But how? Like, I think, especially
it takes him so long to build a fucking wall.
Yeah. I like that answer, actually.
He's plying him with alcohol,
answer.
because I literally plying him with alcohol as he comes down there, and then he gets out some cement.
Oh no, it says I had scarcely laid the first tier of the masonry.
Oh, okay.
So he's literally, he's just beginning to build the wall, and then Fortunato is like sobered up. Well, I suppose again that's why I think the realization that I'm gonna die down here is probably pretty sobering.
Yeah. yeah. I guess you would say.
It was not the cry of a drunken man.
Yeah, but clearly, again, just point to the fact that Fortunato clearly still doesn't understand like why he's down there.
Yeah.
Like, he says he's gonna die, but like also like maybe it is still a joke, because like, why is he doing this? We don't know.
Yeah. But do you think therefore that Fortunato is completely sort of ignorant as to why this is happening?
I don't. I think that is. I don't know. That is a good question. I suppose, like, I don't think that Montresor wants us to believe he is, if he is.
Mm-hmm.
If you see what I mean. Like, I think again, like, I think, like, a lot of the conversation that they have as he's like going, as they're like going towards this final tomb is like Montresor trying to test Fortunato to see whether he can, you know, he is smart enough to sort of realise, like, what's going on. And obviously all of those tests he kind of consistently fails.
We're at the end one, the silence at the end, because he keeps calling back to him. When Montresor is calling back to Fortunato, and then Fortunato is silent. I don't know if necessarily we'd count this as a test, but, like, he's hearkening in vain for reply. For the love of God, which I think is pretty tied into the whole sort of, like, also neither of us are by any means an expert on the conflicts between the Freemasons and Catholics, so we're sort of going off a very general knowledge.
Very generalised
Very general knowledge.
Most of which, I have to admit, comes from the film National Treasure. Anyway, yeah.
The silence of Fortunato.
So yeah, I don't know whether Fortunato. I certainly. I mean, I think whatever it is, maybe he knows he's done it, but maybe he doesn't think it's as bad, because we probably wouldn't either. Probably think it's as bad as Montresor kind of does. I don't know. It's an interesting question, like whether he's sort of aware of it. But yeah, like I think the sense I get about Fortunato is that, you know, Montresor's very concerned with, like, making sure that we understand that, like, Fortunato is more concerned with his own vanity and, you know, his own sense of superiority, so much so that it sort of blinds him to what's going on.
I do think there is also, like, an allegorical reading, I suppose, and also the final, like, against the new masonry I re-erected the old rampart of bones, which does kind of read as a 1 point to Catholicism, 0 points to Freemasonry.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Does,
like,
to be fair.
You know, so
yeah, I think you can definitely read it in that way. But I think, yeah, it is. Yeah, we don't know why. The thing is, we don't know why he did it, and we don't know whether this is a faithful account. So it's sort of like it's a mystery.
At which point, yeah, you've kind of got to do a reading. You've got to decide.
Yeah, you have to decide at some point. What you think. But I think I was actually realised, like, at one point when you were talking about the bricking up with the trowel, like how we were talking about, like, he gets out a trowel, like, in an attempt to sort of prove that he's a Freemason. But I was actually thinking about it, like, does he do that, or is that again like another test? Like, he gets out the trowel as like again, like, another point.
Yeah,
that he's,
look at
like,
what I've got.
Like, yeah, like, like as sort of like a. Like,
why have I brought this down
him.
here?
Yeah, exactly. Like, think about this. like, what does he say again? He says, I can't wait. Control effort for me.
Oh wait, there's many mention of the trowel. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, because Fortunato asks for a sign, and he says it is this, and then produces a trowel with no further kind of explanation of why he's done it. So I think there is a level of, like, no, he's not a member of the Freemasons, and he's embarrassed by it.
Yeah.
But also, he kind of uses that as a sort of, like, because he's
essentially brandishing the weapon as well. That is going to be killing. Yeah. Going to be killing, but it's not because of, like you said, like earlier, because it's not something so, you know, explicitly, it's not such like a weapon of murder, like a knife or a sword or like whatever, because he's showing him a trowel. He's showing him the thing he's going to kill him with, but, you know, Fortunato is not aware of that.
Yeah. So he's just like, oh, you're just joking. And yeah, I think that's because it's obviously, like, in the minds of the two characters, like, the Freemasons are sort of like a kind of social authority. Like, they're kind of like it's a desirable group to be a part of, which is why Fortunato is sort of making fun of him for not being in the Freemasons.
Yeah.
And then, you know, he's kind of like, he gets out the trowel, and it's sort of him saying, like, oh, well, you might think you're better than me, but I am about to kill you.
Yeah.
So, like, I am better than the Freemasons because I am a murderer.
I both want to be part of the Masons, but also I don't even need to be part of the Masons to brick you up.
Yeah, exactly. He's kind of saying, like, oh, well, it's all kind of, like, it all kind of falls flat in the face of his intelligence.
It's very dastardly, isn't it?
It is. It's very dastardly. Okay, more kind of imagery. We'll talk about the crest.
This is Charlie's crest.
This is Charlie's crest. Well, because I think it relates to a lot of like how we think of the relationship between Montresor and Fortunato, and also like the sort of the message of the story overall, which is, so there's a point, one point where he's describing his family crest, which is
I'll get the bit up.
A snake biting the ankle of a boot that is crushing it. And, there's obviously the Montresor family motto, which is, I'm not going to even attempt to say it in Latin, but it basically means that nobody harms me without being punished.
Yeah.
So, this is all relevant, obviously. But I think that the image of, like, the crest is quite interesting because I came across a lot of, like, literature about this, which kind of was questioning, like, who is the snake and who is the boot of the two of them, and it's sort of like at different points they can really be either.
Yeah.
And that they're sort of like in this way sort of mirror images of one another, like both trying to sort of get revenge on the other for the perceived pain that is being done to one another. And yeah, I think the idea of them as, well, first of all, the snake, obviously, again, like another biblical allusion, which, again relates to sort of, the concept of like this being a divine, I don't want to say intervention, but like this is divine justice. Like this is like, there is something more powerful. Well, Montresor wants to think that there is something more powerful than just
There is something impossible to prevent about this.
Yeah. It's inevitable, I suppose, that he must be the one to kill this man. And I think, the concept of like it being inevitable, like it is like literally his family crest. It's almost like what he was born to do, thinking about his family motto, this is the sort of institution under which he's been raised, presumably. But my point about it was sort of like the idea of being like mirror images for one another is interesting because, like we were saying earlier, when you're sort of comparing them as characters, like Montresor like takes a lot of time to sort of explain like why he's better than Fortunato, but like they're actually like very similar. Like he's like, his one weakness was alcohol, and I knew that this was going to be the way that I would get to him because I also drink a lot of alcohol.
Yeah.
And it's just like all of these things where
I actually am a virtuoso, whereas he is not.
Yeah,
Amontillado,
he only thinks he's
he only thinks he is, because obviously Amontillado is a sherry wine, and Fortunato keeps being like, oh, Lucchesi, this other guy that Montresor keeps being like, oh, I can just go and get him instead, like, don't worry about it. And Fortunato is like, no, I want to see Amontillado, this cask, I must see it, by all the rest of it.
Because I am an expert.
Because I am an expert, although he can't tell, he keeps saying Lucchesi can't tell the difference between Amontillado and sherry, the joke being that Amontillado is a sherry wine, so. Yeah,
so that's another way that, like, Montresor is trying to convince us that he's a fool. But
yeah.
Again, like, it's sort of like, they're so similar in this way where they keep saying things that, like, just keep being untrue about themselves. Like, he's trying so hard to prove that, like, he's better than Fortunato, and you just he clearly isn't. Like, even from his own descriptions, like, they're clearly, like, as vain about their own intelligence and their own superiority as one another, which is why it may be like it's so difficult for him to sort of Montresor to accept being of a kind of lower status socially than Fortunato. And maybe that has something to do with it because they are so similar. And yet, like, Fortunato, his name is Fortunate. Like, he literally just is more fortunate than Montresor.
Yeah. But he's down in the vaults of the man's, the Montresor's vaults, admitting that he's forgotten the arms of the Montresor family. When Montresor says, the Montresors, I replied, were a great numerous family. He's not like there is no sort of like, I suppose, platonic attempt to like be like, oh man, he just goes, I forgot your arms. Like, yes, you were. But I've like, you've sort of like fallen into obscurity so much so that I can't even remember what your arm is anymore.
Yeah.
Or your motto.
Yeah, at which point he brings it up and it's obviously the snake and the boot and the revenge shtick.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, my point is that, you know, we're kind of like, as we've you know, really labored the point, you know, so much of this podcast, is that we as the reader don't really like know what's going on. Like, we don't know, like, not only do we not know like what his motives are, what the offense that Fortunato caused him, we also don't know what role we're supposed to play in the story, because you know, we're obviously being addressed directly. For like, Montresor at the beginning like directs this directly to the reader as though he's like confessing this to us. And you know, at one point he says, you who so well know the nature of my soul, that being the reader. And it's kind of like, who is the reader meant to be in this situation? Like, are we meant to be kind of a character in the story that we're just not aware of? Like, who is the you that he is talking to? Who is the reader in this situation? Because I think that like the idea of Fortunato and Montresor, and this kind of links on to some stuff I want to say about Vice, which is sort of like, you know, they're so similar, they're obviously as awful as each other. There's this sense of like divine justice. He intentionally, you know, bricks him up rather than killing him, you know, immediately. Like, as we've said, there's no like smoking gun, as it were. And so like, it's kind of, you can't like, I think like, when I was thinking about like what could this all mean, it's sort of like Montresor and Fortunato, they're not just like mirrors, but they're like the same person in a way. And like,
okay,
Fortunato is sort of like this sort of depiction of the vice that Montresor sees in himself, like, because he's arrogant, he's a drunk, blah blah blah, all the rest of it. And so he can't directly kill like a part of himself, but he has to be bricked away and kind of like contained in this way,
close to the family.
Yeah. Literally in the ancestral home. So like close by. So like, if Fortune, like, I just like the idea that like, that Montresor, like, this sense that he has some kind of sense of self-awareness. Yeah. Like, through using, you know, I hesitate to say that he's using this metaphor because that implies that he's doing it intentionally, but we could read it as like his own sense of like trying to contain his own vice and trying to sort of suppress the worst parts of himself through committing this terrible act. And like, you know, it's so kind of like it's caricaturic as well, because like, he's literally dressed as a clown, like he's dressed as like this kind of like this fool that he has to sort of lock away. And just like, I
think as well, like, this constant, the fact that Fortunato never once in this tale ever sort of like attempts to not necessarily comfort, but just disagree with any of the comments that Montresor makes about the disrepair of his family name and his lack of happiness, and the sort of, you know, he says there were quite a few Montresors once, and the fact that Fortunato not once ever sort of like challenges this opinion, and then also bricking him up in the ancestral, it's almost sort of like, you know, up there you are extremely noble, blah, blah, all the rest of it. I don't think he's necessarily like, how do you feel about it? But I think it's personally satisfying to him. I don't think he thinks that Fortunato is necessarily going to get this point. I think he thinks Fortunato is just terrified at being bricked up alive, which he is.
Yeah, it's kind of like the picture of Dorian Gray, like just a Fortunato in the basement.
Yeah.
Portrait in the attic. Like, And I think that's it, like kind of like linking back to what I was saying about like the reader. You know, there's kind of a greater point to be made there about like kind of the message of the story, which is, you know, I think you could read it as being like about how it like a wider sort of fable for the kind of what happens when kind of like people fall prey to sort of their own pride and like, you know, are very like precious about their sense of vanity and their sense of pride, is that it has these terrible consequences both for Fortunato and for Montressor in a way, because, you know, he's kind of like, well, I don't know. He's clearly still not happy, like
so much so that it becomes a divine law, or a law of nature, or a literal act of rebalancing, in the way that he tries to tell it to us, but the text is obviously littered with his own biases. Yeah,
and so like the concept of like, you who so well know my soul, it's like we know his soul because we are Montressor. We are all Montressor. I think I like that's one reading you could interpret it that way anyway. I think I did this last time. I said it like when I was writing about the Queen's Face. I was like, I am sure, like maybe you could possibly interpret it in this way, and then like proceeded to read like 1,000,001 pieces of academic literature, which was like, you can interpret it. You can definitely read it this way. So I'm sure there's a lot of literature. It's like picking up on exactly this. I'm sure this is not an original thought. However.
That's the thoughts we had.
That was my interpretation
Them's
of it.
the thoughts.
That was, I think that's a good place to end.
Yep, I believe so.
We're done. So obviously we're on summer holiday now, so hopefully we can be a bit more consistent.
Yeah, we'll get a schedule together and actually start uploading.
Regularly.
As we're promising we are.
With the books, with a plan, at the right time. So next time we're doing Dracula.
Yep.
So get reading. And let us know your thoughts, because we're very excited to do Dracula. I'm very excited to do
This is a book club, so yes, please email us.
Like I keep saying, damn it, guys. I know you're out there. Like, I can see the numbers of people who listen to this, and I'm just like, fucking write in. Like, we want to talk to you, you bastards. Like, so yeah, let us know what you think about... Well, you could let us know what you think about any of the books we've done so far, but Dracula is the next one.
Yes.
And hopefully we'll be back. I mean, I don't even want to dare to predict like when we'll be back, but definitely within the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, within the next 2 weeks.
Within the next 2 weeks.
We will be
We have actually read the book, is the thing.
Yep.
We've already read it, so like we're ready to go. Like, we just need to like organize recording.
Yep.
Yep.
That'll be.
We will. Okay.
Thank you very much for listening, guys.
Thank you very much for listening. Stay spooky as always. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Bye.